Today, we have 5 ghost stories which get progressively scarier. Watch until the end to hear a young man's terrifying encounter, which changed him from a condescending skeptic to a firm believer in the paranormal. If you enjoy this type of content, please like this video and subscribe to this channel for a feast of grim and grisly content. I'm your host, Severed Soul. Story 1. I Don't Believe in Ghosts, by Reddit user SlimXRadio. Look, I don't believe in ghosts, spirits and poltergeists, etc. I never have done. I am a Christian, so I do believe in demonology, but not manifestations or hauntings. Mostly, I just believe that we can be misled by our own selfish desires. I think that entertaining those selfish thoughts and getting into bad habits and addictions are the real demons we have to battle with and fear in life. For this reason, I have no explanation for the following encounter. On the afternoon in question, I was home alone and my wife was out running errands. I spent a lot of time home alone, so this wasn't unusual for me in any way. I was scrolling through social media and watching some videos when I heard my wife come through the front door. It sounded like she was carrying some plastic grocery bags from her trip to the store. This was a pretty common occurrence, as my wife loves making excuses to get out of the house, whereas I'm more of a homebody. I got the notification on my phone that the sensor in the kitchen had detected movement. The doorway in the kitchen leads right out into our hallway. From here, you can see people pass by the kitchen door as they cross the hall. Shortly after this, an alert came from the living room camera, which had also detected movement. Again, nothing unusual. We have kids, so we set the cameras up in the family areas so we could keep an eye on them as they play. The cameras come in handy when the kids get into arguments or try to deceive us in any way. The cameras also allow us to speak to them as we run errands. Our kids are older now, so we often leave them home alone. So, after taking note of the alerts, I kept scrolling through my phone, waiting for my wife to come upstairs to the bedroom. After about 20 minutes or so, I could no longer hear my wife, and the motion alerts had stopped. That feeling you get when someone's in your house had now disappeared. I listened very closely, but couldn't hear anything. I called towards the stairs for my wife, but got no response. I got off the bed and started walking down the stairs, calling for her as I went, and yet still, there was no response. When I got downstairs, I checked all the rooms, and I was really puzzled because she wasn't there. I know for certain I had heard her, and I felt her presence in that house. I stepped outside to see if she'd ran out to her car to get something, but her car wasn't there. Now, I was really puzzled. But I eventually came to the conclusion that she'd forgotten something and went back into town. I thought it was strange that she didn't come up and say anything, but maybe she thought I was taking a nap. I made my way back up the stairs and decided to give her a call. I called her on her cell phone, and when she picked up, I asked her where she'd gone. She simply responded she was still out running errands. I asked, "Why didn't you come up and see me when you came home a minute ago?" She responded, "What do you mean? I've been gone for hours." "What?" I said. "You were down there for like 10 minutes. I heard you come in carrying bags. There was a motion alert and everything. I could have sworn it was you. Who the hell else would have come into our house?" There was a pause as we both considered this. She started to get worried and said I should check the cameras. I agreed and told her I'd call her back shortly. Now, My heart was starting to pound a little bit. Who the hell came into my home? Why did they walk in, then leave? Had they taken anything? Was this the first time? Were my children still safe here? Nervously, I pulled up the motion cameras on my phone. I started scrolling through the kitchen footage to just before I'd walked down the stairs. I pressed play on the recording and waited. I clearly heard a slam, followed by a few knocking sounds, like someone was coming inside. Then, the grocery bag noises started. Now, I could really feel my heart pounding in my chest. Someone had definitely come inside, and I was about to watch them stroll past on my camera. As I leaned in closer to the screen, a dark shadow suddenly loomed into view and crossed my entry hallway past the kitchen door. I could make it out as clear as day as it passed by the screen. I was in complete disbelief. What in the hell was that? The camera was slightly distorted from it. It didn't really have any recognisable shape or any distinguishing features. The only way I can describe it really was just a shadowy, shapeless cloud. I switched to the living room camera and played it again. Same noises, only this time I watched in full view as the shadow came from the hallway into the centre of the living room. Then the entire room went dim on the camera, as if a shadow had fallen across the whole room. This was in the middle of the afternoon. Were the cameras messing up? No, I had heard and felt someone in my house. I've been here for 10 years and I've never been wrong. What was that thing? The scariest part was, just as I came down the stairs on that recording, the room lit up again like normal. It was like on a sunny day when a dark cloud rolls over and your whole room goes dim. Only the sky was completely clear. There wasn't a cloud in the sky that day. I've never been more terrified in all my life. I was sitting in the house alone, watching footage of me walking down the stairs towards whatever that thing was. I watched it over and over again, in complete disbelief. I knew for certain I heard someone walk into my house. I felt their presence. There was absolutely no question in my mind that my wife had come home. Only she hadn't. I called my mum because I was so freaked out. I explained what happened and showed her the footage. She just shrugged it off, as did my wife. In hindsight, I guess there really wasn't that much to see. Just some strange noises and a shadow. As I said, I don't really believe in ghosts. I never have. But something was in my house that day. Was he possessed? By Reddit user ZLuna Unknown. When I was younger, maybe 7 or 8 years old, I lived with my grandma in a gated community. Everybody in the area was super nice, and me, my sister, and my best friend at the time, Alex, were the only kids in the area. So we were all very good friends. We pretty much did everything together and spent all of our free time hanging out. One summer, we decided to have a sleepover together. We'd never done this before, but my grandparents agreed and said it was okay, and Alex's parents agreed too. My sister decided not to join in the sleepover because she had a massive crush on Alex. Anyway, we kicked the sleepover off at about 4 PM and started to play some video games. We eventually had dinner and watched YouTube until it was time for bed. I think it's important to mention at this point that I have trouble sleeping. I always have done. This is a result of my insomnia and sleep paralysis. As this was the case, I was awake periodically throughout the night, tossing and turning or getting up to use the bathroom. Alex, on the other hand, was the exact opposite. He could sleep like a rock, regardless of the conditions. At one point during the night, I woke up feeling very cold, despite having blankets on me. I looked around and noticed that Alex was sitting up on his bed, staring at the wall. I asked him what's up, and he just tells me, "Shush." And then he said, "You're going to wake them." Now, at this point, I assumed that Alex meant his parents. Maybe he was doing something that he shouldn't have been doing, and didn't want to wake them up. I shrugged it off and managed to fall asleep again. This happened 2 to 3 times during that night. I would wake up, and he'd just be sitting there, and he'd say, "Shh, don't wake them." I had absolutely no sense of time back then, so I just assumed this had happened over a span of minutes, and I just never fully fell asleep. That was until I woke up, and a shiver went down my spine. I was sweating a lot, and I was shivering all over. I don't know about you, but I shiver when I'm scared. Something in my mind was telling me to just close my eyes and go back to sleep. But I didn't. I was curious to see if Alex was still up. So I opened my eyes. As I opened my eyes, Alex was standing directly above me, staring down at me. Something was really off about his eyes. That's how I knew something was wrong. They were his eyes, but they weren't his eyes. There was something different about them. I asked him again what he was doing, to which he simply replied, "Awake." I assumed he meant his parents, so I said, "Are they mad?" To which he replied, "Yes, very, very mad." While he was talking, his body was as stiff as a statue. After he finished his sentence, I felt a drop of water hit my face. I wiped it away and stood up so I could look at him properly. I could see that Alex was crying. I'm one of those awkward people that never knows what to do when someone's crying, so I just kinda looked at him. "They took me away," was all he said. After that, I decided to go to the bathroom, and when I came back, Alex was back in bed. So I went to bed too, and I managed to sleep through until the next morning. After we ate breakfast, we went to the local community swimming pool, where I confronted him about what had happened last night. He said he had no recollection of doing or saying anything during the night. He really thinks I'm joking when I tell this story. I'm definitely not joking. Story 3. The Warnings, by Reddit user Morbid Lydia 77. Due to the nature of my job, I'll be changing the names of everyone affected and or involved in one of the most terrifying nights I've ever had. The things I'm about to share actually happened to me one night while I was at work. I'm what's known as a personal care attendant or a direct support worker. I work one-on-one with a disabled client. My client, who we'll call Nate, was around 29 years old at the time. Unfortunately, Nate was involved in a freak accident 3 years prior to this. He was accidentally shot in the neck by a stray bullet while he was sitting on the porch of his grandfather's home. This tragic accident left him quadriplegic, meaning he's paralysed from the neck down. I've worked with him for many years now. At that time, I worked from 5 PM to 7 AM while my cousin was at work. I do everything my client is unable to do, from housework to cooking to everyday tasks. Pretty much anything he needs help with, as well as taking care of his 4 kids. After I put all the kids to bed, I got Nate settled for the night. I went through the house and made sure all the lights were turned off and all the doors were locked. They had a security system too, but for some reason I forgot to arm it that night. It was about 10 PM when I went to my cousin's bedroom to watch a movie on my laptop before I went to sleep. About an hour into the movie, I decided to go to the kitchen to grab a drink. It was dark, but I'm very used to the layout, so I didn't bother turning any of the lights on. I heard a sound coming from the front door. Initially, I didn't recognise the sound, but after a few seconds, I realised it was the doorknob to the front door rattling. I have experienced a fair amount of paranormal activity in this house over the years. I peeked out to see if anyone was at the door, and no one was there, so I assumed it was just that. I checked all the doors and windows, made sure everyone was okay, and went back to bed to finish my movie. After about 10 minutes, my laptop started acting up. It froze and started making a very high-pitched noise that I'd never heard before. I restarted the laptop, but the noise persisted. I shrugged it off and decided I was getting tired anyway, so decided to go to sleep. Just as I lay down, I heard footsteps in the hallway, going towards the children's bedroom and the room that I was in. So, I got up, flipped the light on, and looked out into the hallway. No one was there. Once more, I went through the house, checking everyone was okay and making sure all the doors and windows were locked. At this point, I started to feel incredibly anxious. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep now, so I turned the TV on and turned the volume down low so I didn't disturb anyone. This is when I heard a very familiar voice say my name. It sounded exactly like my dad. The problem here is, my dad had passed away 10 years before this. I sat up and looked around the room. Again, no one. Now I'm thinking I'm not going to go to sleep at all. The level of activity was much stronger than usual, so I decided to use the voice recorder tool to find out what was going on. After asking some questions, I heard the voice of a young boy. For reference, my client's children are all girls. It sounded like he said, "Need to be careful." I tried to ask more questions, but I was so tired. Out of the corner of my eye, in the reflection of a large picture frame, I saw something move. I also heard some movement, so I turned to look. I couldn't see anyone directly in front of me, but I swear to God, when I turned to look in the reflection of that picture frame, I could see my uncle standing right behind me. My uncle had also passed away just a few years prior. Then I heard him say, "You can't go to sleep." I'm a paranormal investigator, so there's not much that really freaks me out. However, I'd never experienced this kind of activity before. It was close to 2 AM at this point, and almost 3 hours of constant activity. I finally decided I'd had enough, and I walked over to the nightstand. I grabbed the remote to the security system and pressed the button to arm it. I thought to myself, this is crazy. I just need to get some sleep. I had to be up in a few hours to get the girls ready for school. I stuck my knee on the bed, and at that exact moment, someone kicked the back door in of the house, which is located in the kitchen. The security system went off. It was really loud, and lights started flashing all over the house. I grabbed my phone, dialed 911, and ran towards the back door. I didn't see anyone. One of my biggest fears is someone breaking in. As I was on the phone, I checked to see that everyone was okay, and there actually wasn't anyone in the house. My cousin called because the security company had called him to say that there'd been an alert that somebody had broken into the house. My cousin told them that it was probably an accident, so I told him to call them back immediately. I said, "Someone just kicked your fucking back door in. I'm not disarming this alarm system until the police get here. We never found out who tried to break into that house. But nobody will ever convince me that all the paranormal activity that I experienced that night wasn't someone trying to warn me about what was about to happen. It was truly as if they were doing things on purpose to get my attention, to make sure I armed the alarm system before I went to sleep. If I hadn't, God only knows what would have happened. I'm not really afraid of the paranormal. It's the living I'm afraid of. And this story is a perfect example of that. Story 4. My grandma's house is haunted. By Reddit user Abby Kadabi. My grandma's house, for as long as I can remember, has always been a scary place. My dad, aunt, and uncle all grew up in that house, and each of them say they had paranormal experiences occur throughout their lives. One example of this was when my dad and uncle were teenagers. My uncle was walking down the stairs and was swinging a towel. Out of nowhere, my dad, who was standing in the living room at the bottom of the stairs, saw the towel straighten out in front of my uncle, as if somebody had pulled it, and my uncle fell violently down the stairs. Now, my grandma hates all paranormal things, especially Ouija boards, so it's a big no-no in our family to talk about the paranormal experiences from that house. Approximately 20 years ago, my brothers and cousins were playing in the upstairs bedrooms in my grandma's house. The toys were all set up in the room directly across the hallway from them. They were all in the same bedroom playing a board game. They could hear some commotion coming from that other room. In unison, they all looked out into the hallway. What they each said they saw is absolutely chilling. Out of nowhere, a Hot Wheels toy car with no batteries, no wind-up mechanism, started moving out of the other bedroom into the hallway. That car slowly moved across the hallway into the room that they were in. Needless to say, they were all absolutely terrified and ran out of that room like a shot. Around 8 years ago, my oldest brother moved into the basement of that house. One night, when he was home alone, he was asleep in the basement. He woke up from a deep sleep, having felt like he'd been physically shaken by someone. He stood up and said that he could instantly smell something strange, almost like the smell of tea. He went upstairs and outside the house. We phoned my dad, and to cut a long story short, we found out that there was actually a carbon monoxide leak. If he had not woken up, there's a very strong chance he'd have died in his sleep. Months later, while my grandparents were away on holiday, we decided to download the Ghost Radar app and use it in the house. We all sat around the phone, and my uncle started asking the usual questions. Is there anyone there? Etc. Then he asked, who used to live in the basement? At this point my brother had moved out. The Ghost Radar app replied with my brother's full name. Nobody ever calls my brother by this name. We were all really shocked. So then, my uncle asked, how did you save him? It replied with Wake. We were all starting to get really creeped out by this point. Then he asked, what did you save him from? And the app responded, gas. Needless to say, we were all gobsmacked. The last thing to mention is that in that house, my grandparents' friend's obituary would turn up in the kitchen every month or so. Their friend passed away probably 15 years before. They usually say hello to their friend and then put the obituary back in the basement where it belongs. A little while later, it will inevitably show back up in the kitchen. Please leave any thoughts on this story down in the comment section. Story 5. The Scariest Thing That's Ever Happened to Me by Reddit user Anonymous. To begin with, this happened about 10 years ago, and I've only ever told this story to a few people face to face. And the majority of people I've told don't believe this story to be true. It was honestly the most terrifying thing that ever happened to me. This experience changed me from a condescending skeptic into, well, let's just say I'm a firm believer in the paranormal now. When it happened, I was 22 years old and in my second year at university. For the record, I didn't drink or take drugs. I was living in the Stoke area of the UK, and I was renting a house with my girlfriend and a few friends. It was a mid-terrace house. It was dark and creepy because it only had windows at the front and back. It had a dingy, damp, dark basement with lots of old furniture stored inside. There was a black cat, which I befriended and fed because it would show up at the back door every night meowing. The house was also situated in a dark, creepy, muddy cul-de-sac that served as a communal courtyard and car park. However, none of this really bothered me all that much. As a child, I grew up in a creepy old house that was built in the 1800s. As I later learned, however, this house did bother my girlfriend and my housemates. My housemates told me later on that at night they would hear footsteps in the hallway and in the adjacent living room, only to find nobody there when they'd sneak out to take a look. I also discovered, a year after this event, that the students that lived there before we did couldn't wait to move out. Apparently, this is all because they firmly believed that that house was haunted. My term time ended 4 weeks after all the other housemates. This was because I had to do a clinical placement. This meant that I lived in this creepy, old house alone, which to be honest I kind of loved at the time. I'm a massive introvert, so I love time on my own. It started great. For 2 weeks, I really kind of enjoyed it, despite the background creepy vibes. I would just rationalise any creepiness away, as I still do now. However, after the 2-week mark, I became aware of this creeping sense of dread that I just couldn't rationalise or shake. I'm not an overly anxious person, and as I've already said, I enjoy time on my own, and up to this point, nothing really weird had happened. However, I began feeling very unwelcome and very much not alone. I began feeling how a prey animal must feel when they feel the eyes of a predator on the back of their head. I began feeling so scared that every day I would take the 3-mile walk onto campus and sit and study in the library, even if I wasn't on placement. I'd come home and be living in fear. I even designed a system for moving around the house at night without ever being in an unlit area. I also did this during the day in the windowless areas. I became so scared that I had to move from the largest bedroom into the smallest bedroom. At night, I would lock the door and sleep with my back to the wall. I would often sleep with the light on, and I was inexplicably afraid. I couldn't wait for the final day to arrive, and when it did, I had to lock all the windows, turn off all the plugs, get some stuff from the basement, and lock the back door before I left. I was utterly terrified and felt like I was moving in slow motion the whole time. I went around systematically making sure a light was on at all times, and that I was never in darkness. I had piled all my stuff, backpack and duffel bag, at the front door. The rest of my stuff was mercifully packed in my car the day before. This is where the story gets really chilling, and I cannot adequately explain what happened. It was late afternoon and still light outside, but the house inside was very much dark. I braced myself to turn the hallway light off. The light switch was at the bottom of the stairs, about 4 meters away from the front door. It was pitch black upstairs. This is normal because there were no windows and all the lights were off. I turned the light off and scurried away without turning my back to the stairs. Daylight still lit the hallway from the front door. But as I got to the door, the most terrifying thing happened. The hairs on my neck stood on end. I'm not too proud to say that if I had needed to pee at the time, I would have peed myself. I could see a black and vicious, shadowy mass slowly manifesting in front of my eyes. It started at the top of the stairs and was slowly creeping down the stairs towards me. I felt such malevolence. I basically tripped backwards out of the door onto the street. I lay on my back, staring up at this entity. I slammed the door shut with my foot and felt instant relief. I locked the door and posted the key through the letterbox as quickly as I possibly could. That was the last time I ever saw that house. The only possible way to explain the way I felt was to liken it to a dementor or a ring wraith, except there wasn't a caped humanoid figure chasing me. It was more of a fog with no distinct shape. The fear and dread was indescribable, and I've never since experienced anything like it. I had and have no mental health issues. I was very happy with my life and wasn't suffering with any stress at the time. I even feel crazy and slightly embarrassed telling the story, but I swear on my life it's all true. Has anyone else ever experienced anything like this? If you enjoyed those stories, please like and subscribe for a feast of grim and grisly content, and leave your thoughts in the comments section down below. I'm your host, Severed Soul.